Thank you, Karen. All right. Our next presenter, Don Slish, and the topic of his presentation, Psychedelics, Not Your Father's Hallucinations.
Okay, so I have given this talk before, and I usually get an hour and 15 minutes to do it. So strap in, okay? Okay, so when I think about, I was born in 63, so when I think about psychedelics in the 60s, I think tune in, drop out, whatever. Just a bunch of hippies having sex, doing drugs, and annoying the greatest generation, okay? But when I was coming up in the 70s, this is what LSD was, right? They all told you if you did LSD, you're going to jump off a building. You're going to think you're flying, but you're actually going to die. And then in 71, our favorite president, Nixon, made even experimenting with them illegal. So you couldn't do anything with psychedelics for 30 years, 35 years. Psychedelics, we're talking about LSD, psilocybin, and DMT. DMT has got a really short half-life. So ayahuasca is basically DMT with a MAO inhibitor in it that allows it to last longer. Basically, all these three things do exactly the same thing. So they're just different ways of activating the same receptor, which is your 5-HT2A. It's one of 11 serotonin receptors in your brain. Basically what happens is normally serotonin is released on these receptors, which then causes more glutamate release from a glutamate axon. And glutamate is stimulatory, so you get more stimulation. These receptors are mainly in your sensory and cognitive areas, and they just give you stimulation everywhere in your brain all at once, and just where those receptors are, but everywhere in the brain. What does that mean? What does that do? I forget my next slide. Oh, so anyway, when the trip starts, basically what's happening is it's stimulating your occipital lobe. So your occipital lobe says there's something out there to look at, doesn't know what to do with it, it just makes a pattern out of it. So that's where you get these weird patterns and colors and stuff. This is not part of the therapy, this is just one of the things that happens. The real part that is growth producing is the depersonalization that happens at the peak. So basically, it's an out-of-body experience where you get self-reflection. And this is the classic thing they say, I saw God, that kind of a thing. Basically, you lose all sense of yourself, and you're just in the experience at the time. That's the cognitive aspect. So cognition, what is that? We've got two main networks of cognition. One's the default mode, when your mind is relaxed, and you're kind of thinking about yourself and relaxing. Task positive is the flow state, when you're working on something really seriously, and you forget about yourself. Default mode, and then each of these have got very specific areas in the brain where they're located and specific tracks that the communication goes through. These are well-worn tracks. This is what you're doing as you're growing up, is learning how to think properly. And this is kind of makes your brain really efficient, so you can think quickly and well. And these tracks get well-worn because of neuroadaptation. Neurons that fire together, wire together. So the more you think in these patterns, the stronger those patterns get, and those are the ones you're going to use most of the time. So those are the cognitive pathways we use on a regular basis. So the downside, though, with this neuroadaptation is in depression, you get caught in these loops of negative thoughts. You feel bad, and you feel bad about feeling bad, and you get caught in this loop, and you can't get out of it. All you can do is think about how depressed you are, and you can't do anything task positive, you can't do anything. And that's a loop between your amygdala, which is your emotion center of the brain, and your medial prefrontal cortex here, which is part of the default mode network. So you're stuck in this loop of thinking about yourself and how crappy you feel. That's all depression is. How do you get out of that? Well, here's a kind of a representation of connections in your brain normally. So these are the strengthened pathways of that default mode and the task positive mode. You've got very defined pathways that make it really efficient, and rigid ways of thinking, more or less. This is what psilocybin does. Boom. Okay, it opens all of this up. You've got stimulation everywhere, and things are just going. So what happens is you've got all kinds of pathways opening up, mind expansion, and this is where that spiritual awakening happens. And you get the loss of self, sense of self. And another thing psilocybin does, so anyway, a good way to think about this, sorry I got lost there. A good way to think about this is kind of like a snow hill. It's like, this is your normal way of cognition. This could be your depressed pathway. And you keep taking that path the same way every time. On a snow hill, it's really hard to get out of that path. Psilocybin is like 2 feet of snow. Boom, all the paths are filled in. What does that mean? It means you can make new paths now. Okay, you're not going to be stuck in those same paths. You've got the opportunity to find new ways of thinking. And another thing psilocybin does is it increases neuroadaptation, which means not only can you make new connections, you can strengthen those connections really quickly and really easily. So once you get this, you're in this therapy where you're making new ways of cognitively thinking, you can strengthen those pathways really quickly. And like I say, you're not going out in the woods and getting stoned. It's part of a therapy. Okay, so you've got preparation, you've got the trip itself, and then most importantly, post-treatment. Assimilating that experience and integrating it, making sure the pathways are strong and they're going to work for you. And does it work? This is depression. This is therapy. This is your SSRI. This is psilocybin, okay? That's 2 weeks after using it, okay? And this is 3 months after one trip, all right? This is taking that drug every single day, and it's not as good. So what does it do? Basically, significant decreases in anxiety and depression, improvements sustained for greater than 6 months from one experience, opens these new pathways, and you've got that neuroadaptation and therapy to strengthen those new pathways to get you out of that bad way of thinking and into a more healthy way of thinking. I did it.